This is Talkback with Peter Christian and John King. 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 101.5.
Talkback is brought to you by the Mustard Seed Asian Cafe in Southgate Mall, Kootenai Creek Village, the maintenance-free active adult community in Stevensville, offering the best of Western Montana living. Call 777-5387. By Dig It Excavating, bringing 30 years of excellence to every job. For all of your excavation needs, call Glenn at 214-4292. And by Transport Equipment, your headquarters for RV service, maintenance, and repair. Transport Equipment just south of the Y, next to the Axeman. All right. Well, we had a crazy morning this morning. Peter is out. Well, technically he's in, but he can't talk. He's losing his voice, and we're doing the best we can to conserve that treasure of Missoula by making him do a jig on the other side of the control panel here. We won't be hearing much from Peter, but we do have the opportunity today to speak with adjunct Professor Richard Erb from the University of Montana. He teaches about economics. And we also have Bob Seidenschwartz in studio from the Montana World Affairs Council. Thanks, both of you, for coming into the studio today and helping us out.
Our pleasure.
So, Bob, I'll go ahead and let you get things started. Sure. I'm sure you got a plan here today.
Yeah, we do. And we also should mention Dick is former deputy director of the International Monetary Fund and continues to serve in an advisory role, continues to go to, I understand, a number of the conferences that are held. So we've got an individual in the office that is really dealing at the highest level of economics and political issues in terms of what's going on a global basis. Also should mention, too, because sometimes I don't think we ever take it for granted, but the people that come into the studio give a great deal of their time. Dick also has a ranch up in Moise. So in addition to his duties at the university, running a ranch, worrying about water, being on the water board, in the Flathead Valley, he's taken time out today to be with us to discuss some of these issues. So Missoula, listen closely. There's a lot of very good information we're going to disseminate here today.
Well, he's already on the waterboard. He's prepared for the waterboarding that is a talk show here on Talkback.
Right.
We do,
but in a more gentle fashion.
Drips, like
yes.
little drips. Yeah. We do. I think we've had Richard on over
Several
the phone,
times.
right?
Several times. Yep.
Yeah. And also your wife, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Which was
Joanna
a pleasure.
Shelton. Yep.
So, welcome back to the show, Richard.
Oh, good to be here.
So I'd like to start out with, if we're looking at a global basis right now, there's concern with slow growth in China. Europe, of course, still struggling the issues of migration, which we're going to talk about a little bit today in terms of that economic impact. U.S., some are thinking we could be heading into a recession again. Feds raised interest rates at the end of last year, put off raising rates here at the beginning of the year, and there's talk that they may delay that once again. So there's an awful lot that's just percolating out there right now. So I realize I'm asking a lot, but if you could give a little bit of an overview in terms of what's working and what's not working out there in terms of the kind of state of affairs.
Well, what's working, I guess I would focus on the U.S. economy. It's doing quite well compared to many other economies in Europe and Japan and China and also in the emerging markets. How long that will last is, of course, another question. But I don't want to be too pessimistic about the U.S. economy. It's not in a boom stage, which is in a way good because booms always lead to busts, and that is a pattern throughout history. So, in a way, the slow recovery that we've had since the 2008 financial crisis has enabled that recovery to last a lot longer than it otherwise would. But we still have issues in the U.S. of slow wage growth. We've got improvements in the labor market, but it's not showing up as strongly as it could in the wages that are paid.
And you mentioned slow wage growth. I mean, that's one of the principal focuses right now in the political campaign. We're having on the Democratic and Republican side talking about wage stagnation, the increase in wealth of those in a certain class versus the majority of the population. So give us a little insight as to really over the last 15, 20 years, what has caused, in some ways, this wage stagnation?
Oh, that's a big question. I think there have been many factors at at work here. One would be technological change, and you see it every day. Things that today are being done with the computers, with telephones that even 10 years ago were not even imagined, and they're replacing people. Can you imagine what it would be like today to be traveling on airlines without computers? I mean, can you recall? I mean, you're old enough. I'm old enough to remember the days you'd go and you'd sign they'd give you a ticket, and they'd do all kinds of things on. They put little stickers on it if you changed it, and on and on. And you waited in a long line, but now you go in and you can check in very quickly.
Well, look, any of us that have been to an airport, nobody talks to each other. They got their heads down, they're plugged in, they're on their computers, and it's just one of those changes where I've noticed over the last several years where it's like, who's looking up at each other? Everybody's on their screens.
And you'll find a little puddle of people wherever there's an outlet to charge up their phones.
Yeah.
The other day, we went to watch a movie with my kids. Zootopia came out, right? The new Disney movie. And the internet was down. And the university was turning away people that wanted to buy candy and food because they didn't want to process anything without a card machine. So,
well, you've just raised something that has been bugging me for a long time. And that is the fact that so many people have telephones. They go around looking at them, and you walk down the street. I was in New York recently, and everybody's looking down at their cell phone. The thing that I wonder about, and I have to say, I live up in Moise. It's a valley that is surrounded by mountains. We don't have good cell service. So I'm out of touch, really, with a lot of the new technology of using a telephone for sending emails and getting emails and so on. But the question I have is the following. How do people afford these telephones, these cell phones, and all the services that go with it? I mean, whenever I've looked into the cost, they're very expensive.
Right.
But everybody has one.
It's one of those things that people get like a car. Cars are really expensive. Almost everyone in America has one. I mean, it's just like one of those things you feel like you need to have to survive these days. If you're searching for a job, I mean, it's hard to get one without internet on your phone, et cetera.
Sure. But what are they giving up? I mean, we have slow growth in wages and incomes. And we've had this dramatic increase in an expenditure category. What is it crowding out? Is it crowding out housing? Is it crowding out automobiles? No, automobile sales have been booming.
Yeah, and that's a result of low gas prices, especially large trucks. We've seen another round of major expansion of truck purchases because people feel good about being able to drive and fill it up for $80 versus $120 or something. But to your question, I think what happens is we don't think about these things. It just becomes a part of our life right now.
Right.
We just pay that bill. And I will tell you, just watching friends and family, if they can't find their phone or if there's not a plug-in, there's this momentary panic that sets in, that somehow you're not connected to the world if that phone isn't working. So these things, I think, are slow. They're somewhat insidious. But now, I don't think people can imagine living without this. And it's just a necessary part of their budget.
But that is also true in other countries. And in some ways, other countries are further ahead of the United States. I mean, there are the areas in Africa, for example, where landlines are not used anymore.
Well, there's no infrastructure. So they just leave.
But even where they where the World Bank put in the infrastructure, it's not being used.
Well, even back around 2005 when I was living in Japan. I mean, what you see now on today's streets with people on their cell phone all the time, targeting your cell phone. When you walk into a store, they'll show you the ad. It'll go to your phone. I mean, that sort of thing was going on back then. People were already glued to their cell phones all the time. We got to go to another break. When we get back, I did have a question for you about technology, Richard. And my question was this. You had mentioned that the U.S. economy was stronger than many of the world economies elsewhere. And I was wondering if being the harbinger of many of these technologies has helped solidify U.S.'s positive position on the economic front.
You already know the formula for business success is earning more and spending less.
Well, it is almost St. Patrick's Day. Peter won't even be here. He's going to be over near Ireland, but not quite there, playing around in England and Scotland next week. Today, though, speaking of international events, we've got Richard Erb in studio, and he's an expert when it comes to the world economy. If you have a question, Give us a call, 721-1290, or post your comment on Facebook. Before the break, I had asked you a question, Richard, and that was something you had said earlier in the show. You had mentioned that the economy in the U.S. seemed to be doing better than most of the other economies around the world. And I guess my question for you is, do you think that a lot of people see America as a leader in many technological enterprises when it comes to software development or even hardware development with computers and phones and things like that? Do you think that any of that infrastructure that we have intellectually or culturally has led to our position in the world economy?
Well, I agree. I think that's why the U.S. economy is relatively stronger than many other economies. But at the same time, when I look at what's happening in other countries, and of course, at the top of everybody's list these days when they look internationally is China, and the training, the education that has been spent on bringing young kids up to par to be able to invent all of these things that we've been inventing in California. But I was just yesterday or the day before, I can't remember the name now of what the head of what company, but he was saying that we have trouble finding qualified people here to do the work that we need to be doing in software and other development, and that's why they've gone over to other countries, not just China, but Japan and elsewhere, and also India. So we shouldn't rest on our laurels there, and should focus on ways of certainly improving education. I mean, that all the measures that of comparative education show us deterioration in the quality of U.S. education.
Well, that's certainly one of the emphases that will probably be in this governor's race coming up. Greg Gianforte for a long time has been pushing that curriculum, that Code Montana curriculum, to try to get kids into coding and technology at a younger age, because it's a portable kind of job. You can work in Montana, or you can work like Edward Snowden does apparently in Russia. You can go anywhere.
Dick, you just brought something up that when you're talking about people having to find skilled workers. Recently, there was an ad and some discussion in Montana. They cannot find electricians, plumbers, steam fitters. We're lacking those type of skills. You can apply that to many other regions of the country. Recently read an article about Russia having problems finding labor. Now, there's a lot of problems in Russia, that being one of them. One of their issues, they're so involved in the Middle East right now in terms of Syria that their factories are running full speed in terms of reproducing the munitions that they need, but they don't have the engineers and they don't have the laborers right now that they need to be able to keep up with this. So this is not an issue just unique to the United States. This is happening in many industrial countries. So while we've technologically moved forward at a very rapid rate, I think in some ways it's been at the expense of the people that actually are the makers and builders.
Yeah, I look at Russia, and that is truly amazing that country was the focus of so much of our fears and attention during the whole post-war period. But it is still, in terms of military, a very powerful country. But in terms of its economy, it's a declining country. Not only because they don't know how to run that economy, but and allow competition, but also the population is declining. Mm-hmm. So that is a clear problem there. But I think the more dynamic economies, of course, it's a cliche. They are in Asia, and it's not just China, but what's happening in Southeast Asia, and then also Japan.
I wanted to ask you about an article that I saw in The Economist about 2 or 3 issues ago, and I think it was called "Running Out of Ammo" was the topic. They were mentioning the idea that maybe Keynesian economics has run its course, that there's not enough money to inject into the marketplace to get things going again. And the countries that are trying to do it the old-fashioned way, I guess the last century's way, are struggling to make it work. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think that's one of the most fascinating things about this period, particularly since 2008, in that so much of what we learned about monetary policy and even what we've learned about fiscal policy, we're in new territory now, and particularly monetary policy. Given what the central banks have been doing, pumping money in through what they call the quantitative easing programs, huge increases in their purchase of assets, government securities. In this case, in this country, when they were doing it, mortgage securities. But that program is over for the Fed, but it's still underway in Japan. It's still underway in the euro area, and also now what we're finding in other countries is that the central banks are implementing negative interest rates.
So I've got to ask you, you need to explain to the audience what these negative interest rates are. And also, when we're talking about quantitative easing, we've heard these terms. I don't know that everybody really understands the principle and thinking behind this and some of the implications of what we're dealing with as a result of this quantitative easing.
Well, the quantitative easing, that's been a huge increase in the purchases in the U.S. of government securities and mortgage-backed securities. In 2008, the Fed had less than $1 billion reserves or of assets of government assets. It's now over $2 trillion. It's this huge. I've got a chart.
Yeah.
It's flat for the whole post-war period, close to zero, and then it goes up, and you can't show the full scale of the chart. But then you ask, well, what's the principle behind it? But that's what people are actually searching for. A lot of economists are searching for what is the principle? How do you explain it?
Well, when it comes to quantitative easing, which sounds like fluctuation to me, it sounds like a silent but deadly fart. When it comes to quantitative easing, when it comes to America compared to the rest of the countries in the world, did we invest more in this kind of program, or did they comparatively? And do you think we can learn anything about that? Actually, I'm going to hold you for your response because we got a break here. We'll be back in just a second, and we'll get Dr. Erb's response. Give us a call at 721-1290. All right, we're back on the Talk Back Show. Give us a call, 721-1290. We have Dr. Erb in studio, and a question I had asked right before the break. Is there anything we can learn about the amount of this, what we're calling quantitative easing that different countries have invested in? Has it worked?
Has it worked? That's a big debate right now among government officials and among economists. How has it worked? Has it worked, and how has it worked? I think it was Ben Bernanke, the former Fed governor, who said at one point that it seems to be a consensus that it has worked and helped us get out of the crisis in 2008, but not in theory. There is no real yet theory of quantitative easing and how that works. Clearly, the way it has worked in a practical sense is that it helped prop up equity prices. Stock markets recovered very quickly when the Fed began implementing the quantitative easing, because the Fed's pouring all this money and buying treasuries and pouring all this money in. It goes somewhere, and some of it goes into the stock market. The second thing it went into was the bond market. Right. And bond prices rose, so people felt the wealth effect of an increase in prices. Now, for those who depended on interest, say bank deposits and so on, they've suffered a loss there. Another impact, and this goes to the global context, and that is when the Fed was really pouring the money into the U.S. economy back in 2010. What it was doing was weakening. It was creating international flow problems, and a lot of money then flowed into Brazil, and it pushed up the Brazilian real, the exchange rate. And the Brazilian finance minister at that time was saying that the Fed was engaging in a competitive devaluation. Now, those same things are being said now about what Japan is doing, that Japan, by pumping so much money in, has been lowering the value of the yen and making it more competitive. And that's the same thing that has been said, criticism of the European euro area policy, that one of the side effects of that is to strengthen the dollar and weaken the euro.
You had mentioned that the U.S. Quantitative easing structure kind of pushed up the stock market prices. My question for you is that just artificial, and will that come crashing down, just delaying an inevitable?
I don't think it was artificial. I think, particularly initially, the stock market had just overreacted negatively to the crisis. and this helped to, I think, to reverse that impact.
And as somebody in the business, when we come back, I can give a little insight as to how that has potentially created a bubble, both on the bond side and on the equity side, because there was very precise human behavior at work here that maybe the Feds weren't counting on in terms of where people were making decisions to invest their dollars.
All right, we got to go to our top of the hour break. This is a hard break, so I don't want to have anybody get cut off mid-sentence. The phone number for you to call is 721-1290. You can also, if you go to Facebook, you can see a picture of Dr. Erb and Bob Seidenschwartz and put your post under there. I'll read it on the air and get your questions answered about quantitative easing. If there are any answerable questions in that regard, it sounds like it's still under study. And this episode of Talkback is brought to you by Bulls Eyewear, where they offer some of the lowest prices in town on contact lenses. See Lynette at Bulls Eyewear at 2910 South Reserve. By Nissan Hyundai of Missoula, it's under new management. They're offering rebates, discounts, and 0% financing on a huge selection of inventory. Stop by and check their HD diesel trucks and sport all-utility wheel drives. Nissan and Hyundai of Missoula on Brooks near Southgate Mall. And by Selway Armory, 2825 Stockyard Road, Unit E6. More guns and ammo than anyone in Missoula and the best prices in Montana. Montana's premier firearms dealer. By the way, one of my favorite joys is reading that Selway Armory ad when I have someone from out of town. They're like, whoa, this is real Montana radio. Yeah. All right, we have Dr. Richard Erb in studio. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Montana. He has a background in economics, and he's specifically qualified to talk about the world economy. We have also with us, speaking of the World Affairs Council Chairman,
President, bottled washer, whatever needs to get done.
El Presidente Bob Seidenschwartz.
Grand Poobah.
In the studio as well. Now, I'm going to turn it on over to you, Bob.
I had called you yesterday, and I said one of the areas that I want you to talk about are, right now, if we look at the global economy, where are some of the risk areas that are not only percolating, but could be ready to erupt out there that people should at least be aware and thinking about? And you had mentioned a few off-air, such as China, Europe, Middle East. So if you would please kind of give us some of those insights.
Well, I think at the top of my list, and it's also, I think, at the top of just about everybody else's list who's looking at developments in the world economy, is China.
Right.
And what's happening there. And what you see in China is huge excess capacity in a number of areas. And by the way, that excess capacity has created problems for countries that exported basic commodities, metals, and so on to China, because they're no longer needing to import that. They have to figure out how to use
So countries like Brazil, Australia, which is a developed country, but a huge exporter of raw materials.
Yeah, raw materials to China. It's interesting, the European Union Chamber of Commerce recently released a major report on the excess capacity in China, in the steel industry, auto industry, and on it goes. So that's a major issue. China is undergoing some financial sector reforms. It's been trying to open up its financial sector, but in the last year, they've had very large outflows of money. For years, they had huge inflows of foreign money into China, and now they've got huge outflows.
And who are these outflows? Where's these outflows being derived from? Are these business individuals or these corporations that are starting to move their capital elsewhere?
That's right, yes. Corporations, individuals, and the Chinese government now just recently in the last few days has taken decisions to make it more difficult for companies to take money out of China, and also for anyone that had invested in China to take that money out. And that's been the struggle in the exchange markets, this tension between the outflows and the exchange rate, because what those outflows do is push down, create a downward pressure on the Chinese yuan. And, of course, that is something that really sets Washington, D.C. off.
Because that's good for China if you're an exporter.
If you're an exporter, yeah. Right. And that, you had our Secretary of Treasury in a meeting just a week or so ago declare that the Chinese yuan will not fall, will not depreciate, will not decline, and that the government is intent on maintaining the stability of the
So
oil.
there
which
are
it
no
has.
free markets, are there? There's a lot of...
No, there's a lot of control and
Yeah.
regulation. But one of the ways that the Chinese government has been, in effect, defending the exchange rate, keeping it from falling, they've been selling off a lot of their securities that they bought when money was flowing into China.
Okay.
So China has had accumulated up to about a year ago $4 trillion worth of foreign assets. Very large percentage of those were in U.S. Treasuries. They're now down to about $3.2 trillion because over the last year they have been spending money in the exchange markets in order to keep the exchange rate from falling. So there's this huge pressure, financial pressure for downward exchange rate. But tremendous political pressure, particularly from the United States, against any downward movement in the exchange rate.
If you guys could put those headphones on, we got a call. Catherine's on the line. As soon as you're hooked up there, we'll hit the button and get Catherine there. Okay, here we go. Catherine, you're on the air.
Okay, good morning. I wanted to ask you specifically about the oil market and what you see about that, because Saudi Arabia and Russia both are pretty much, their economies are almost totally dependent on oil. Saudi Arabia is continuing the OPEC oil policy of overproducing oil, which leads to an increasing oversupply of oil, and you couple that with a decrease in the demand for oil. You mentioned China, and China's economy is slowing, so that the need for oil is lowering, which leads to great imbalance in the supply-demand notion, you know. So I wanted to ask you what you thought is going to be the end result of that, if you see an increasing political instability, and how you think that's going to work out.
Thanks for the call, Catherine.
Well, Catherine, that's a good question. The last time that we had a large decline, sharp decline in the price of oil was in, I recall, the late 1990s. And you could buy gasoline at a very low price. It was $1.70, $1.80 a gallon. So we've had this experience before where we've had periods of very tight oil markets and very high oil prices, which we had just before the financial crisis in 2008. Remember at that time, as I recall, the price of oil was at a high. And then we've had periods of very low. So I think the oil market is a cyclical market. It's cyclical in a special way in that governments have a major role to play in the way the markets behave. It's the Saudi government. It's the Russian government. There are other governments, too, that decide how much they're going to produce. It's surprising to me in a way, but the Saudis have been very clear that they don't want to reduce their production. Neither do the Kuwaitis, and that would be the only way in the shorter term to have a significant impact on the price of oil. So you're right. There is this tension, and each of these governments is wrestling with it, and I see pressures within each country to maintain their oil production, because if they don't, then they will lose revenue.
All right, we got to go to a break. We got to listen to our commercial production. During the break, it's a great time to give us a call. 721-1290 is the number. That's 721-1290. All right, we're back on the Talkback Show. And Bob, you had a question you wanted to follow up from Catherine's conversation.
Catherine always has great questions, so kudos, Catherine. But along the lines of what she had asked and what Dick was saying here, a couple of things that are very important for us, and please weigh in. Right now, as you said, there is a simple oversupply of oil versus demand.
Right.
And that appears to continue to be the case for a period of time. Hard to say if it's 9 months or a year, 18, we don't know. The other thing that people don't understand is there's about 3 billion barrels in storage. So it's not just the oil that's being produced versus demand. You still will continue to have the overhang of what's in storage that has to at least start coming down to send price signals to the market. To what we were talking about off air, the Saudis get about 90% of their revenue from oil export. The Russians get about 50%. of their actual revenue that they generate from natural gas and other types of resource. So their economies are very heavily dependent on really singular type of assets. So if you're looking at this from an economic standpoint, talk to us about how problematic is that from your perspective going forward. Let's assume oil prices continue to stay low for 18 months to 24 months. What do you envision in terms of what that effect is on these oil exporters on the global economy?
Could you make that into a multiple choice question
Yes,
or
A,
a true
B,
and
C, or D.
false question, please?
My apologies, sir. Again, I've asked too many questions. Shut that brain off, Bob.
Well, I think right now, but the world economy already is absorbing, I think, the negative consequences from the point of view of producers of oil, the negative consequences of that, and that's one of the reasons why we see poor performance in other countries in Latin America and Russia and elsewhere, and the Middle East. So the question then is going to be, well, how long will it take for the oil market to turn around? And there, on the other side, the demand side doesn't seem to be responding yet that quickly to the decline in the price.
They've actually lowered their expectations in terms of demand. Yeah, just recently.
And that's the question I just put before you. I know I'm the mystery man here, but if all these markets are emerging and growing and more and more people coming online all the time, why is the demand for oil, gas decreasing, thereby leading to this reduction of prices?
Well, there's been a lot of technological change that's taken place, including the non-oil, wind power, electrical power. I was looking at, if I can now remember my numbers, 'cause I've been focusing on Kerr Dam and the power project there. And in recent years, California has added about the equivalent of about 19 Kerr dams with power just generated at Kerr Dam up where I live. It's so you've had the non-oil sector subsidized in many ways, including from China, and there's been tremendous use of solar, increased now in California and elsewhere. So that's also working to keep down the demand for gas and oil where that has been used in the past, and that's why the coal sector.
But Dick, isn't mostly oil and gas, or especially oil, a transportation type of asset usage as opposed to solar, which is an electric generation type of resource? So, in other words, oil is still the principal use for transportation. Solar is an electric generation. We still don't have a lot of people driving solar or electric cars.
Right.
So is there other factors at play here, such as I just read recently where even though gasoline prices have come down, you would think we'd be driving more, but the statistics prove to be different, that we're actually not driving any further miles when prices were higher versus where prices are now. So is there something shifting in just our use of our automobiles or just general, population changes? We're getting older. Are we driving less?
You're making a connection back to what I asked earlier about the use of cell phones. Yeah. Adjustments are taking place in this economy that I don't think we yet fully understand, and you've just added to the list of them. And so that, maybe in another few years we'll see more data that would help us answer that question.
Well, it's actually...
But I was going to say the counter is that people are buying, bigger cars now. And that's been, I think, the response, hasn't it been, if you follow the auto car industry closely? And Yeah.
Well, the ones who are driving the most are the delivery trucks from people buying things online, so they don't have to go to the stores. And no, seriously, I know people who have just given up going to retail stores because retail stores have limited their supply because people are not coming in, so they can't afford to have much inventory, which again drives people online to find what they want, and they don't have to drive. And so, again, the demand for gas goes down. And so I think all of that works together, or am I just all wet?
We get like 3 or 4 boxes a week.
Yeah. No, that's right. I think that's, again, among the shifts that are taking place that we don't yet fully understand. I think there are a lot of major shopping centers that now understand that problem because they're out of business. or going out of business.
We also have an aging population here and in Europe. So when I look at statistics about energy demand, it's in terms of oil usage, it's stayed pretty constant. Where the growth is taking place is the emerging economies. That's where they expect automobile usage to really explode in the years, to come.
Oh, yes, yes.
All right, we've got a Facebook question from Greg, and I want to read after this quick break. Give us a call, 721-1290. Get your word in edgewise as well. That's 721-1290. And we're back on the Talkback Show. We have a question from Gregan. I'm going to read this real quick, and then we'll get to our callers. We got the lines almost full here. Gregan says, after the stimulus, the federal debt was holding approximately at $10 trillion. Would you agree that the out-of-control spending pushing the debt up to $18 trillion by the Democratic White House was basically shooting the taxpayer in the foot?
Looking back over the last 15 years, 20 years, Republicans and Democrats have been very good about increasing our federal debt. I think the politics of that, people like to spend money, and whether they're Republicans or Democrats, don't want to pay taxes, and therefore the government ends up borrowing. So that's the pattern here is the pattern in a lot of other countries.
But that scale of change, the trillions of difference between what we have done in the past, I mean, that's a new epoch in the amount of spending this country's been under, right? I mean, I can't think of, except for maybe war spending.
Well, you have to go back to say the response to the 2008 recession, and there was a huge fiscal stimulus at that point in time, and that injected again a huge increase in the amount of government debt. So you have to look at it from a cyclical. Any increase in debt, you have to look at it from a cyclical point of view. You have to look at it from the point of view of what happened to debt in previous recessions. I mean, this is the problem in country after country that I saw at the IMF. They did not take advantage of the good years to build up a surplus. And when the bad year came along, they ended up having to borrow huge amounts of money to try to get the economy going again. And that's why in this country and every other country, you've had big increases in debt.
All right, we got a call from Florence, and I believe she has an answer to some of our cell phone questions, or at least think she does. We'll get her on the air. Hey, Florence, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, we have 5 in our house, and they're all prepaid, pay as you go. We all 5 of us use Straight Talk, and it's $30 a month for all of it, for each phone, and that's unlimited everything.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for the call, Florence. I mean, certainly there's cheaper phone systems, and one of the things about technology is it does seem to be driving the price down for many things.
It gets commoditized.
Like if I wanted to go and rent or watch a movie, which I did a lot yesterday because my kids are all sick and they can't go anywhere, and I don't want to touch them because I don't want to get sick. I can pull up Netflix for like $9 a month. They can watch as many movies as they want. I mean, obviously you could take that too far, but it's a lot cheaper. Cell phones too. I mean, when my dad got his first mobile hammer, as a big cell phone that looked like a brick with a stick on the end, that thing was very expensive, and only like people that had certain types of jobs would get those. And now everybody has one.
So to Florence's point, I don't know, does she get coverage all across the country, or does a deal like that limit where she may have access to coverage?
I just don't know.
Yeah,
I think
you're talking to two neophytes here.
It's one of the challenges of buying a cell phone these days, and all the different services you can get, and how to price them, how to find out what's the best way of getting that service. And that I think we face not only with respect to cell phone, but also with respect to accessing the internet via satellite or cable.
All right. We got another call. Dave is on the line. Also, you can give us a call at 721-1290. Thanks for calling in, Dave.
Good morning. About globalization and education, I have a friend who's an engineer, graduated from a big school, and he had many jobs over the years, and they all eventually got downsized or outsourced. and now he's down to a minimum wage job. Now, you can, and when it comes to competition, education, I mean, if you can get a cheaper engineer from China or from somewhere else, people would pay for it. And so, that is, education in itself isn't necessarily a cure-all for all this.
Thanks for the call, Dave.
And one other thing about cell phones. He does have a cell phone, but I think people, minimum wage jobs who have cell phones, they just cut out other things. They stop being good consumers and other items. They just spend most of their money on their cell phone.
That's probably true. One evidence of that is the handheld gaming market. If you've ever seen kids with Game Boys in the past, most of those kids don't buy that hardware and that software. They buy one cell phone and then download their games digitally onto their cell phone.
Going back to your point about education, there's two parts to that. One is the basic education that one gets in high school and then in college. But that education that you, particularly in something like engineering, that education that you get in college is out of date very quickly. I teach international finance, and I tell my students, look, what you're learning today will be out of date within 6 years or a few years. And so I say to them, and I emphasize, what you have to learn is how to continue to learn. And we have an education system here that it's high school, college, maybe graduate school, and that's it. But in 10 years, you're completely obsolete in your brain. The way the world is changing. So the education you need to then have follow-on education. Maybe a 4-year or 2-year program when you're in your 40s. Or when you're in your 50s. Or the alternative is that you have to really work hard to keep up. And in that sense, I think the Internet has been a huge positive change. I'm out in Moise. We don't have good cell service, but we do have high-speed through Blackfoot, high-speed Internet access. And I can stay in touch with what's going on around the world today a lot better than I was able to when I was at the International Monetary Fund. I can get up in the morning, I can check newspapers around the globe. I can go to a central bank website and find out directly what they did that day, or a finance ministry. I could not do that when I was at the IMF.
All right. Hey, we got to go to another break. When we get back, Dr. Erb, I'd like to ask you how you teach your kids how to learn how to learn. So maybe you'll give us a few pointers when we get back. The phone number is 721-1290 if you've got a question. We're back on the Talkback Show. Of course, you can join us, 721-1290. The phone line is always open, unless we're having some technical difficulties like we are with Peter's voice today. Before we went to the last break, Dr. Erb, you had mentioned that one of the things you try to teach students is that it's so hard. The world's developing so fast that anything they learn today will maybe be obsolete within the next 6 years. So how do you teach someone to keep up with what's going on in the world?
It's not easy, that one of the things is really learning how to use the Internet to learn. I find that a lot of students know how to use the Internet, but have not really learned how to use it to get basic information. For example, in my professional area in international finance, to get them to learn how to go to a central bank and get information, or how to go to the International Monetary Fund or the Bank for International Settlements. That's a major step in terms of the education process. So I introduce that into my course with the hope that at least maybe one of those institutions will stay with them if they're going to stay in international finance or specialize in it, that they will then see those as ways of staying in touch and how to continue to adapt to the changes.
We've got another call. This one's from Harry, and we'll get him on the line here. Thanks for calling in, Harry.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. First, I got a question also, guest request. But question is, what you said that our economy right now is doing pretty much better than most of the rest of the world. And I was wondering, what was it that we did, or was there something that our useless, worthless government ran by that horrible Obama guy who does nothing? Is it something they did, or was it something built in within our system itself, or was it just that we worship the right God and are exceptional?
Harry, you voted for Obama, didn't you? I think you had said one time that you were.
I'd say
only kidding, Harry.
Harry is. I think he is tongue in cheek, actually.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for your call, Harry.
One more thing. Just a guest request. You talk every time I hear anything about man-made global warming, you sort of poo-poo it. Well, we should get an environmentalist scientist or a professor from the university there to come in and actually talk about the facts. So
you know what? That's a great idea. We actually did that. We had a guest with the political science. We had a political science professor with our political science on the radio show just about 4 weeks ago.
Scientist. How
Sorry?
about environmental scientist?
Well, that's his specialty is environmental science and world policy.
Well, that's political science. But I mean, I actually just have the facts about the things. But anyway, that's just a request.
Okay. Well, thanks for thanks for the idea. We're back with Mr. Erb. I wanted to get your take. Why do you think? And obviously he threw out a couple options there. And I guess that's your multiple choice question. Was it something the government did? Was it the God that we worshiped? Or was it some other element in U.S. society that allowed the economic front to fare better than the rest of the world?
I'll take D. I'll take answer D.
And what would that be? All the above?
Can you repeat that question?
So this is Harry's question was was it our government actions by our government that caused what happened, caused the U.S. or some other thing?
It was in many ways a normal response to a very large cyclical decline. When you have a decline like we had in 2008 and 2009, there's eventually going to be some recovery underway. But as I said earlier, that recovery has not been as strong as in previous recessions. There's been something special going on. Now, it depends on, I suppose, one's political persuasion. You might get those who say, well, it's because the Fed was doing too much with quantitative easing and so on, or the fiscal package was too big and now we have too much debt. On the other hand, now I'm being two-handed economist here, you get those who say, no, the federal government did not do as much with the fiscal response and left too much to the Fed. And therefore, there should have been more stimulus, less worry about the accumulation of debt. This is the debate that's taking place in Europe. This is also taking place in Japan. Central banks are saying, look, we have gone to the extreme in trying to maintain a recovery or to get a recovery going in the case of Japan and Europe. And the government is not doing enough and what they mean is the old Keynesian approach would be to increase demand through government programs.
Let me give you my interpretation, and you can rip across my macroeconomic theories here really easy, probably. But my interpretation of why America did better through the recession is at least twofold. First, America is more flexible than many of the other countries. Most people that work in America will trade jobs, jump from one job to another 5 or 6 times in their life. In Japan, another country that I've lived in my past, most people would only change jobs maybe once or twice in their life. So if there was a dramatic shift, and there has been, whenever there's a recession, if there's a dramatic shift in the way the market's working, Americans are more adaptable than many other economies to get into a new marketplace. The other thing that I think that's interesting is that our financial markets is where we saw a lot of investment. So when things dried up, people went to the stock market to spend their money. They jumped stocks up, but many of the companies on that stock market were U.S. companies, and so that got domesticated.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that the U.S. economy in many ways is a lot more dynamic and adaptive than other economies. The labor sector, for example, now there's a plus to that, in that we've had an increase in employment that's been better than, say, in Europe. I suppose you could say the negative side to that is that people who have more jobs in the U.S., and this is a rough comparison, but the one reason why unemployment remains so high in Europe is the rigidity in wages. Mm-hmm. Now there's a big strike in France now because of labor issue. Here you have a lot more flexibility in terms of mobility, but also wages. And so, wages have not been as strong, and people have had to take, in order to be employed again, they've had to take a big cut in pay.
So, Dick, one of the, if I can call it a criticism of the recovery, is recent job numbers look good. But then when you went deeper to see where the jobs were actually being created, to Peter's point earlier, a lot of service jobs, bartenders, people, making minimum wage or a little bit higher. And is that a fair critique of this recovery? Has it been a good jobs recovery or to what I just mentioned?
Well, the recovery in employment has been, as you said, it's been largely, I think, in the service sector,
Right.
although there are other sectors, too, that where you've had an increase. I think, and this gets into an area where I haven't really done a lot of study, but when people looking at this basic question of why are we growing so slowly, why do we have this income inequality, we are adjusting to a world where through technological change you can produce so much more with fewer laborers. And so for people to be, for a population to be fully employed, they're going to end up one way or another then in the service sector. I mean, take agriculture. 100 years ago, agriculture was a major employer of people. Today, it's a minor. I mean, I can farm 240 acres on my own today, whereas 50 years ago it would have taken 3 or 4 laborers. In the manufacturing sector, they can produce so much more today, now particularly with robot technology and so on. So we're moving down this historical path where even the manufacturing sector now is kind of emulating the agricultural sector. And where does that leave you? It leaves you with a lot of service jobs. Now, the problem there is that they're not very high-paying jobs.
All right. We're at another break. We have one line open. Give us a call at 721-1290. We also have a question from Greg on Facebook. We'll get to that in just a second. All right, we're back on the Talkback Show. We've got callers in queue, so let's go to them. Our first caller is Ray. Thanks for calling in, Ray.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for taking my call. I was wondering, did you say the government created the demand for the services in the Keynesian big economic plan?
No, I didn't say it created services. I think what the government did with the stimulus package, particularly in 2008 and 2009, I think that did add to overall demand, and that helped. That did help the recovery. The same thing occurred in other countries. Without that stimulus, I don't think we would have recovered as quickly as we did. Now, whether that stimulus was handled properly, that's another question. There, I think that the problem with the stimulus was that it wasn't focused enough on how to create overall demand. It was at times too focused on one sector or another sector.
I wanted to get back to Harry's question from earlier. He kind of tongue-in-cheek because we're on the other side of the aisle when it comes to political differences. But a lot of people accuse the Obama administration of overaction, of too many restrictions, of redistribution of wealth through a bunch of programs that some might argue actually lengthened this recession. Is there any case there, do you think, that the actions of the government may have stretched out the length of the recession?
I wouldn't. No, I don't think that there's evidence that somehow the government slowed down necessarily the recovery in a macro sense. Now, you could say that the government actions in different sectors may have had a negative impact on some sectors relative to other sectors, but that's different from the overall impact. I'm not a big activist with respect to government policy, either monetary or fiscal. But there is, I think, a very strong case for the use of supportive monetary policy and fiscal policy when you're faced with a major financial and economic crisis. And one of the reasons for that is that when things are good, people overreact, and you get a boom. And no one worries about the potential of a bust. And then when a bust happens, it goes the other way. The people then get panicked, and then so you have to kind of change that psychology. I mean, one of the things that it has changed in economics is more focus on behavioral psychology. And it's clear, the idea that you get these booms and busts driven by changes in moods and psychology, there's a lot of evidence for that. So government policy can help break that at a moment in time. But, there's a point where you run into the limits as to what government can do. I think the Fed clearly is at the limits of what it could do. And even on the fiscal side, everybody talks about, well, spend more money on infrastructure. The problem there is that that means that a lot of people, men, women who are in the service sector now, are going to have to go out and get jobs, building bridges and putting highways in and so on. And I've often wondered how quickly will that transition take place.
I wanted to ask you another big question, and it has to do with immigration trends and the way that they affect economies. This is something that's playing out in this election cycle. Obviously, whether you're Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, immigration policy is one of the highlights. But this is something that's also taking place overseas. If you've been following what's going on in Syria and what's happened in Germany in the past with the Turkish immigrants that came in there and affected the big changes in the way that they did work in that country. Is there anything we can learn about immigration patterns and how they affect economies for a country?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be learned there because in this country we have experienced benefits from immigration. If you go down to Texas and some of the border states, I know that immigration is a controversial subject there, but the reality is there are a lot of service jobs in hospitals and so on that are filled by immigrants because they can't find non-immigrant workers. I think there are probably other sectors where migration has crowded out, particularly at the lower end of the wage scale, jobs that otherwise would have gone to citizens have gone to immigrants, particularly, and also illegal immigrants. And that certainly is true, I think, in the construction industry.
We got to go to another break. We'll be back right after this quick break. 721-1290. Give us a call now. We won't have time to catch your call after this break, most likely. We're back on the Talkback Show, and we've got
I like the Doobie Brothers music, by the way.
That's Peter's selection choice there. Well, let's go straight to callers. We've got Chuck on the line. We're going to get Chuck on. Yeah. He's on line, too. Thanks for calling in.
Your guest isn't going to like me, but I'm so sick of this kind of a conversation. No details, no effect, and a lot of half-truths. The people coming from the south of the United States into Texas didn't fill service jobs. That wasn't what went on. What went on is people from Detroit were going in caravans down to Texas looking for jobs and couldn't find them because the immigrants coming in had taken over the jobs at a substantially reduced rate. This is all bureaucratic gobbledygook. The government decided we had to have our fair share of unemployed, had to share our wealth, and had to share our jobs around the country, around the world. That's been going on for years. And the reason Donald Trump is strong is because the other politicians, Democrat and Republicans, talk gobbledygook and don't get to the details. So
where's your examples? You just mentioned the guest is giving us gobbledygook. I'm hearing gobbledygook coming from you with no specifics, no real information except you're venting. I get it. I understand.
I came from Detroit, and thousands, tens of thousands. That's where some of the millions of Detroit citizens have gone to, was places like Texas and other states looking for jobs and setting up tent cities. And there is no need to bring people in from Mexico. All this is to reduce the cost of labor so the wealthy gets wealthier, whether they're Democrat or whether they're Republican.
Thanks for your call, Chuck. What do you think?
I'd like to know where these tent cities were. I mean, that would be a major news story if people
cities?
were coming from Detroit and setting up places in Texas looking for work. Either that or there was a media attempt to black this out. I just want facts.
Texas
did a very good point.
Texas did boom during the recession, pretty famously, largely because of the energy sector. Yeah. Well, thanks for your call, Chuck, and your opinion.
I do know that there were some tent cities outside Las Vegas from people who lost their homes and had no place to live but live outside the city in tents. And that's what happened. So.
Well, there's tent cities today in Seattle. Their homeless population is booming.
Dave's on. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
Hold on. Mr. Erb wanted to respond real quick.
Go ahead.
Looking at the major forces at play here from a supply and demand point of view, from an economic point of view, surely the influx of immigration and illegal immigration did put downward pressure on wages. And that's why people, I think, are rightly concerned about illegal immigration. Surely the huge increase in, say, imports into the United States had an impact on employment in sectors where people were put out of work, and that's another one. Surely technological change has had an impact on the distribution of income in these countries. So these are supply and demand forces at play here, and each one has its advantages and disadvantages. But we'll just stop there.
All right, let's get Dave on the line. Dave, thanks for calling.
Yeah, good morning again. About the stimulus money, I've read that 50% of the stimulus money went to states across the country to balance their budgets because of the crash of the economy in 2008.
I think that there's a good argument. We're not talking here about TARP. We're talking about the Recovery Reinvestment Act.
Right.
My understanding is that even in places like Missoula, the money went to projects that were already, quote, shovel-ready. These were plans that were in place by the cities and municipalities and states that they were going to do, but instead of doing them with state money, the federal money did it anyway.
Right. The states were short on money, and if they hadn't got that money, they would have either had to cut back on services and lay off workers, or they would have had to raise taxes to get these projects done. So, I mean, we can argue all day about whether it was effective or not, but that's what happened.
All right, Dave, thanks.
Thank
you. We got another caller?
We certainly do. Marilyn.
Marilyn's on the line.
Hi, Marilyn.
Good morning. Every time I hear that there's jobs out there that Americans just won't do, I think, well, I'll bet they would if their welfare check was cut. There's no incentive out there to go work for a lot of people because they get free money from the taxpayers, and the taxpayers are getting soaked, and it's called socialism, and that's a problem. So, I mean, if they weren't getting food stamps, how long would the food lines be? I think we're in a way bigger depression than anybody is ever willing to admit, and the debt is a problem. So
Thanks.
I hope all that will be discussed.
Thanks for calling, Marilyn. Let me ask you about that, though, Mr. Erb. When it comes to a country's social safety net, countries obviously in Europe and elsewhere have invested heavily into those systems. America has less so than many others. Has that allowed us an economic platform, as Marilyn infers here?
Well, I think at the margin, there are probably people who don't work because they get special social benefits, but I don't overplay that. I think we look at both the election campaigns now, both the Democrats and Republicans. You have a lot of people who are very unhappy, and I think they're unhappy not because and that they're expecting they're going to get big government handouts in the future. They're unhappy because they want work, and they want work that gives them an 8-hour day job, that gives them opportunity to earn a growing wage over their lifetime, and we have less of those opportunities today than we had, say, 30, 40 years ago, and so it's not that people are not asking, I don't think, for more handouts. They want work and employment and not have to go to 2 or 3 places to work.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. Thanks so much for coming in, Dr. Erb and Bob. And we'll be back with Talk Back tomorrow. I'll be probably sleepy, but we'll be talking with Meals on Wheels, and we'll speak with some veterans about the VA and other healthcare options.